In 2022, the world spent $240 billion preparing for, conducting, and sustaining war. That is not a historical figure. That is not adjusted for inflation across centuries. That is a single calendar year. And somewhere inside that number, decisions were made that you were never meant to examine too closely. This video is an educational analysis of publicly available financial data, corporate disclosures, and documented economic history. Its purpose is not to accuse. Its purpose is to show you the structure. What you conclude is yours alone. Here is what the history books confirm without dispute. During World War I, J.P. Morgan became the sole purchasing agent for Britain and France inside the United States, processing more than $3 billion in arms contracts by 1917. One bank, two nations at war, an exclusive arrangement with no competitive bidding. That relationship did not emerge from nowhere. It was constructed, negotiated, and maintained while men were dying in trenches. That is a fact of record, not allegation. Between 1991 and 2003, the United States spent approximately $8 trillion on military operations, procurement, and veteran care connected to Gulf-era conflicts. That figure comes from documented government expenditure analysis. $8 trillion did not disappear. It traveled. It moved from public treasuries into contracts, into suppliers, into shareholders. Money in war does not stop existing. It redirects. Global military spending in 2022 reached $2.24 trillion, the highest figure ever recorded in human history. The arms trade that year reached a record $597 billion in deliveries, with the United States accounting for 40% of all exports. According to data published by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. These are not controversial numbers. They appear in public filings and institutional research. In February 2022, Russian forces entered Ukraine. In the months that followed, Lockheed Martin recorded $65.98 billion in revenue for the full year, and its stock rose approximately 37% in the opening months of the conflict, according to public market data and company filings. Lockheed Martin is a publicly traded company. These figures are disclosed. They are not disputed. What analysts and researchers study is not whether these companies profit from conflict. That is visible in the numbers. What they study is whether the financial architecture surrounding modern war creates structural conditions in which prolonged conflict becomes, in economic terms, more rewarding than swift resolution. That is a different and harder question. Some economists and policy researchers have argued that what they describe as the military-industrial complex creates concentrated financial interests in sustained procurement cycles, meaning that long wars generate longer contracts generate more revenue, and more revenue generates lobbying capacity that influences the political decisions that determine when conflicts end. This is a structural argument, not a criminal one. No finding by any court or regulator has established that any specific company has acted to extend any specific war for profit. The companies involved would argue, and have argued publicly, that they provide essential national security capacity, that deterrence requires preparation, and that their role is to supply governments with tools those governments have chosen to acquire. That position is on record. It is part of the public debate. But here is what is harder to explain away. In 2022, while Ukrainian cities were under active bombardment, the Ukrainian government hired BlackRock, the largest asset manager in the world, to coordinate a reconstruction fund estimated at more than $750 billion. Before the war had ended, before the scope of destruction was final, before the last missile had landed, BlackRock has publicly confirmed this engagement. The arrangement has been reported by major news organizations. Critics and analysts have raised questions about what it means when the financial architecture for rebuilding a country is assembled by private capital while the conflict that requires that rebuilding is still ongoing. BlackRock has not been accused of wrongdoing in connection with this arrangement. The Ukrainian government has described the engagement as necessary for coordinating international investment. Both positions are public record, $750 billion in reconstruction contracts, being organized before the war that created them had ended. What some researchers describe as the full economic cycle of modern conflict runs in a single direction. Weapons are sold before war, commodities, oil, grain, metals, are traded during war, with prices elevated by disruption. And reconstruction is financed after war, or in some documented cases, during it. At each stage, identifiable financial actors extract measurable returns. This is not a theory. The revenues and the contracts and the fund structures are in public filings. What cannot be stated as established fact is whether this creates active incentives that influence decisions about peace. That question sits at the edge of what public evidence can confirm. Some political economists argue the incentive structure is self-evident and requires no conspiracy to function. That markets respond to war, and that response reshapes the political economy of ending it. Others argue that defense spending reflects genuine security requirements, and that conflating profit with intent is analytically unsound. Both positions exist in serious academic literature. What history records without ambiguity is this. From J.P. Morgan's exclusive wartime contracts in 1917 to the $8 trillion that moved through the American defense economy between 1991 and 2003, to the record-breaking arms export figures of 2022, the financial machinery surrounding war has grown larger, faster, and more interconnected with each major conflict. Whether that growth reflects genuine security demand or something more structural is a question that serious analysts have not finished answering. The number that stays with you is not 2.24 trillion. It is the gap between that number and any honest accounting of what it purchased, and for whom. Here is the question I keep coming back to. When the financial returns from war are this large, this consistent, and this structurally embedded across banks, contractors, and asset managers, do you believe that the people controlling those returns have a meaningful incentive to end conflicts quickly? Or does the architecture of modern war finance make prolonged conflict in purely economic terms the more rational outcome? Tell me what you actually think in the comments.